It started as just another glittering night high above New York City. A billionaire surrounded by power, luxury, and men who thought nothing could touch them. But that night, one careless decision would unravel his empire. Because in the middle of his marble penthouse, under the glow of crystal chandeliers, he singled out the one person he believed could never challenge him: his chauffeur's young daughter. She wasn't dressed for the occasion. She didn't belong in that room, or so they thought. To the powerful men laughing over whiskey and cards, she was just a child, an easy target for their arrogance. But what they didn't know was that this little girl carried something they could never buy: brilliance, courage, and a plan that would change everything. How could an 11-year-old expose the weakness of a billionaire before the entire world? Before we start, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Ethan Caldwell was the kind of man whose name carried weight in every boardroom, cocktail party, and political fundraiser. A billionaire industrialist who thrived on attention, he built his empire not just on steel and shipping, but on intimidation. For him, wealth was more than privilege. It was power to remind everyone else how small they were. He had a reputation for crushing rivals, humiliating partners, and reducing employees to silence with a single cutting remark. To Ethan, every interaction was a stage, and he was always the lead actor. For nearly a decade, Marcus Green had been his chauffeur. Marcus was dependable, quiet, and invisible, the way Ethan liked his staff. He drove the gleaming black limousine through New York's endless chaos, opened doors without hesitation, and endured insults without ever answering back. Marcus was a man who carried dignity in silence, not because he lacked pride, but because pride meant survival when working for a man like Caldwell. At home, however, Marcus's world was very different. He lived in a modest apartment in Harlem, far from Ethan's glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. His pride wasn't in cars or wealth, but in his daughter, Layla. At only 11 years old, Layla was already showing brilliance that couldn't be ignored. Teachers whispered about her rare intelligence. Neighbors marveled at how she carried herself, often with a notebook in hand, sketching out math problems far beyond her grade level. Layla's world was built not on luxury but on discipline, love, and curiosity. She spent hours at the public library, soaking in books about mathematics, probability, and even game theory. While other children her age played video games, Layla was fascinated by the way numbers revealed hidden patterns in life. She never bragged about her talents. Instead, she asked questions, always humble, always searching for understanding. Marcus supported her in every way he could. On his limited salary, he bought secondhand textbooks and an old tablet so she could connect with online learning communities. That's how she met Dr. Harris, a retired MIT mathematician who had quietly mentored her from afar. He saw in Layla what Marcus already knew, that her mind was sharper than most adults who strutted through Caldwell's penthouse. But Marcus kept this pride close to his chest. The last thing he wanted was for Ethan or anyone in his world to notice Layla. Ethan, however, was always looking for weakness. His private poker nights had become infamous among New York's elite. They weren't simply games. They were displays of dominance. Senators, hedge fund managers, Hollywood producers, each attended not just for the cards, but for the unspoken performance of bowing to Ethan's arrogance. He loved raising the stakes not because of money, he had more than he could ever spend, but because he enjoyed watching powerful men sweat. For Ethan, poker wasn't a pastime. It was a weapon. Marcus had driven Ethan to countless of these nights, watching from a distance as laughter, whiskey, and power filled the air above the city. Never once did he think his daughter would be pulled into that world. But fate had other plans. One chilly evening, Marcus was instructed to bring Layla along. Ethan, in one of his unpredictable moods, had insisted. To Marcus, the request felt odd, almost dangerous. But refusing wasn't an option. Ethan Caldwell didn't ask, he commanded. So Marcus arrived at the penthouse, Layla by his side, her small figure dwarfed by the towering skyscrapers, and the glittering skyline that reflected off the glass walls. For Layla, it was like stepping into another planet. The air carried the scent of aged bourbon and cigar smoke. The men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns barely noticed her at first, too busy swirling their glasses and exchanging jokes about billion-dollar deals. But Ethan noticed. He always noticed. From his seat at the head of the polished oak poker table, he smirked when Layla entered. To him, she was just another prop for his amusement, another way to remind Marcus of his place. He leaned back, glass in hand, calculating. He had broken CEOs, manipulated senators, and destroyed rivals. But humiliating a loyal chauffeur in front of the city's elite? That would be a new kind of entertainment. Layla sat quietly, observing. She didn't fidget, didn't flinch, and that alone unsettled Ethan. Most adults squirmed under his gaze, yet this child sat steady, her eyes scanning the table with calm curiosity. The men laughed at the absurdity of her presence. She didn't belong there, or so they thought. What none of them realized was that Layla had been preparing for moments like this without even knowing it. Every late night spent studying probability, every equation solved, every strategy learned under Dr. Harris's guidance. All of it had been quietly shaping her for a challenge far bigger than she could have imagined. As the cards were shuffled and the stakes were raised, an invisible tension filled the room. Layla was no ordinary child. Ethan Caldwell was no ordinary man. And that night, their worlds were about to collide in a way that would shock everyone watching. Because arrogance has a way of underestimating brilliance. And when brilliance rises from the most unexpected place, the fall of arrogance becomes inevitable. The laughter in Ethan Caldwell's penthouse carried a cruel edge. From the moment Marcus walked in with Layla, the room had shifted. The tuxedoed men, flushed from bourbon, smirked at the chauffeur's daughter standing under the glittering chandelier. To them, she was out of place, a child who would never belong in their gilded circle. To Ethan, she was an opportunity, a chance to remind Marcus of his place, and to amuse his powerful guests. "Let's see if the girl is as clever as she looks," Ethan announced, his voice echoing against glass walls that overlooked the dark stretch of Central Park. He motioned for Layla to take a seat at the oak poker table. Marcus froze, his heart pounding. He wanted to protest, to shield his daughter from becoming the center of this spectacle. But one glance at Ethan's eyes made clear there was no choice. Defiance would mean consequences. Layla sat quietly, her small frame swallowed by the leather chair. The cards shuffled, chips clinked, and the men leaned in, eager for entertainment. They didn't see her as a child, let alone as a person. They saw her as an object of humiliation, a way to strip dignity from her father. Ethan set the first wager with a smirk. If Layla lost, Marcus would be forced to double his work hours and apologize publicly for raising a disrespectful child. The room erupted in laughter. The cruelty was casual, effortless. What none of them knew was that Layla wasn't trembling. Beneath her calm expression, her mind whirred with calculations. Years of studying probability, of breaking down patterns, of watching players reveal their hands not with cards but with their gestures had prepared her. She understood risk, she understood pressure, and she understood arrogance, especially the arrogance of men who thought themselves untouchable. The first hand ended with silence. Layla didn't just win. She dismantled Ethan's strategy with precision. Murmurs rippled around the table. The laughter dulled, but Ethan forced a chuckle. "Beginner's luck," he said, tossing more chips into the pot. But already his jaw had tightened. The stakes grew. Ethan wagered that his yacht was docked in Miami, then his vacation villa in Lake Tahoe. Layla, steady as stone, kept winning. Each card revealed a truth the men at the table didn't want to accept. This child wasn't here to be humiliated. She was exposing them. Every flicker in Ethan's eyes, every impatient tap of his fingers. Layla read them like a book. By the third round, the guests' laughter had turned uneasy. A senator shifted in his chair. A producer whispered under his breath. The spectacle was no longer funny. It was unsettling. Ethan, red with frustration, poured himself another drink. He had faced rivals on Wall Street. He had crushed unions. He had silenced journalists. But the thought of losing to a chauffeur's daughter was intolerable. He needed to win not just for himself, but to preserve the image of invincibility that held his empire together. And so the bets escalated. With every loss, Ethan pushed further into recklessness. He staked his penthouse in Dubai, his art collection, and his Hamptons estate. Marcus sat rigid, his knuckles white, silently praying for the strength to protect his daughter. He knew what was at stake wasn't just property. It was their survival. Because if Layla lost, the cost would be devastating. His job, his reputation, and the fragile security he had built for her. Layla, however, didn't falter. Her face betrayed nothing. She played each hand with the focus of someone far beyond her years. To her, this wasn't a game. This was the moment where brilliance could pierce through arrogance, where silence could be transformed into power. The room grew tense. No one spoke above a whisper now. Ethan's smirk had disappeared, replaced with clenched teeth and trembling hands. His arrogance was cracking. The men who once laughed at Marcus were now watching Layla with a mix of disbelief and dread. Every card turned over was a strike against the myth of Ethan Caldwell's invincibility. Finally, Ethan slammed his drink onto the table and shoved his entire fortune into the center. "All in," he growled. $20 million on the line, his Hamptons mansion at stake. The room held its breath. The condition was clear. If Layla lost, Marcus would resign immediately, leave New York forever, and apologize on video for daring to believe his family had worth. But Layla had her own condition. If she won, Ethan Caldwell would fall to his knees and beg Marcus for forgiveness in front of everyone, and the entire apology would be broadcast for the world to see. The guests gasped. The demand was unthinkable. A child challenging a billionaire with his empire at stake? Impossible. Yet the spark in her eyes said she meant every word. Cards slid across the table. Ethan revealed his hand, 2 kings, 2 queens. Strong. Nearly unbeatable. His grin returned, wide and savage. For a moment, it seemed the humiliation of Marcus and his daughter was certain. But then Layla revealed hers. A straight flush, 6 to 10 of hearts. The table erupted. Gasps, shouts, the crash of a glass hitting the floor. Ethan's face drained of color. His body trembled, the aura of power he clung to dissolving in an instant. And then Layla reached for her tablet. Quietly, calmly, she revealed the truth. Every moment of the night, every insult, every bet, every word dripping with arrogance, had been recorded and broadcast live. 25,000 viewers were already watching. Hashtags surging. Comments exploding across the screen. The world wasn't just hearing about Ethan Caldwell's downfall. They were witnessing it in real time. The guests stared in horror. Ethan's phone buzzed relentlessly. Investors were fleeing, journalists were calling, and his empire was beginning to fracture before their eyes. And yet the night wasn't over. Layla had only just begun to show how far arrogance could fall. The room that had once been filled with laughter was now suffocatingly silent. The glow of chandeliers reflected off sweating brows, and every eye fixed on Ethan Caldwell, the man who had just been dismantled by a child. His glass trembled in his hand, bourbon dripping onto the polished oak table. Around him, the city glittered through the glass walls, but inside, the empire he had built was collapsing in real time. The live stream didn't lie. 25,000 viewers had grown into 50,000. Ethan's voice, dripping with arrogance, his mockery of Marcus, his reckless bets. All of it was being replayed, dissected, and shared across the internet at lightning speed. Billionaire bully's chauffeur's daughter was already trending. Every second, new eyes were witnessing his humiliation. But Ethan was not the kind of man to bow easily. His face flushed red, his words slurred with rage. "This is nonsense. She cheated," he shouted, pounding the table. "You think anyone will believe the word of a chauffeur's brat over mine?" He turned to the others, desperate for support. Yet the same men who once laughed at his jokes now looked away. No one wanted to be tied to his sinking ship. Marcus sat frozen, his heart twisting. He wanted to grab his daughter, to walk her out of that poisonous room, but he couldn't move. He saw the fury in Ethan's eyes and knew that men like him, cornered and humiliated, were dangerous. For years, Marcus had endured Ethan's cruelty silently. Tonight, that silence had been broken by the very child Ethan sought to ridicule. Ethan's phone buzzed again and again. He snatched it up, his face paling as he read the flood of messages. Board members were abandoning him. Investors were pulling out. News outlets were circling like vultures. Every insult he had spat at Marcus was now public record, magnified across millions of screens. He had spent a lifetime constructing a facade of invincibility, and in less than an hour, it had been torn apart by an 11-year-old. Layla sat still, her face calm, her small hands resting on the tablet that had exposed it all. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply watched, steady, unshaken. In that moment, she wasn't just a child. She was the mirror reflecting Ethan's ugliest truths at him. Then came the breaking point. The condition Layla had placed before the final hand still hung in the air. If she won, and she had, Ethan Caldwell would kneel before Marcus Green and beg for forgiveness, live for the world to see. The guests shifted uneasily, whispers darting around the table. Could this titan of industry, this self-styled king, actually stoop to his knees before the man he had belittled for years? Ethan slammed his fists onto the table, sending chips scattering across the floor. "Never," he barked. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual confidence. "I would rather burn everything I own than kneel to a servant." His rage filled the room, but it no longer carried weight. The live-stream comments scrolled faster, viewers mocking him, demanding he honor the wager. Every second he refused, his empire bled further. Vanessa Caldwell, his wife, placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. The wives of senators and producers whispered urgent pleas. They weren't concerned about honor, they were concerned about survival. If Ethan didn't bend, he would break, and they knew it. "Ethan, please," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're destroying yourself." But Ethan's pride was a cage. He looked at Marcus, the chauffeur who had endured his cruelty for a decade, and the idea of kneeling to him ignited a fury he couldn't contain. Yet the world was watching. His board demanded damage control. His allies were abandoning him. His power was disintegrating before his eyes. The pressure became unbearable. Sweat rolled down his temple. His hands shook. He looked at Marcus, then at Layla, who held his empire's fate in her steady gaze. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell was not in control. And then it happened. His knees buckled. Slowly, with the weight of humiliation pressing down on him, Ethan sank to the floor. The room gasped. Cameras flashed. His voice cracked, raw and broken. As he whispered words no one could believe, "Marcus, forgive me." It wasn't just an apology. It was a surrender. A titan of industry, the man who believed himself untouchable, was brought low before the very man he had dehumanized for years. And the world saw it live. Layla, without hesitation, uploaded the clip directly to Ethan's own social media accounts, which she had quietly hacked moments earlier. Within seconds, the footage spread like wildfire. By the time Ethan rose from the floor, his legacy was ash. His name, once synonymous with power, was now a global punchline. Marcus stood tall, his daughter by his side, while the billionaire who had mocked them both was left trembling, his empire unraveling around him. But this was not the end. For Ethan Caldwell, the true consequences were only just beginning. The fallout was swift, merciless, and irreversible. Within hours of Ethan Caldwell's public collapse, the video of his apology spread across every major platform. 10 million views by sunrise, 20 million by nightfall. Headlines screamed his humiliation. Billionaire brought to his knees by chauffeur's daughter. The empire he had spent decades building unraveled before the eyes of a global audience that had no sympathy for a man who had wielded arrogance like a weapon. Stock prices plummeted. Sponsors vanished. Lawsuits piled high. The board of Caldwell Industries, desperate to distance itself from the scandal, stripped Ethan of his position within days. His Hamptons estate was auctioned, and his Dubai penthouse was seized to cover debts. Even his inner circle, the same people who once laughed at his cruelty, abandoned him. Power, influence, and fear had always been his armor. Now he had none. For Marcus Green, the world shifted differently. No longer bound by silence, no longer the invisible man behind the wheel, he walked away from Ethan's service with dignity intact. Within 3 months, Marcus was offered a role far greater than he had ever imagined. Vice President of Human Resources at an international logistics firm. His years of quiet resilience were recognized, his integrity rewarded. He stepped into a life where his worth was measured not by wealth or title, but by respect. And then there was Layla. The girl who had entered that penthouse as the subject of ridicule walked out as a symbol of brilliance, courage, and hope. Media outlets celebrated her as the girl who checkmated a billionaire. Yet Layla herself didn't bask in the spotlight. Instead, she built something lasting. She launched the Layla Green Academy, an online platform offering free advanced math and probability lessons to disadvantaged children across the world. Within weeks, 12,000 young learners had joined, kids who, like her, had been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. She turned humiliation into empowerment, using knowledge not as a weapon for revenge, but as a bridge for others to cross. Ethan Caldwell, meanwhile, faded into disgrace. His wife divorced him, moving to Italy to escape the wreckage of his name. Investigations into fraud and tax evasion mounted, leaving him a pariah in the financial world. The man who once commanded boardrooms with fear was now a ghost, shunned and ridiculed. In a final twist of irony, he reached out to Marcus, voice broken, asking if there was any kind of work available. And Marcus, after a long silence, offered him a position as a warehouse janitor at minimum wage. The billionaire who had mocked Marcus's dignity now scrubbed floors in anonymity. But the true power of the story isn't in Ethan's downfall. It's in what it revealed. It showed how quickly arrogance collapses when exposed to truth. It showed that brilliance can come from the places least expected, and that those deemed powerless often carry the deepest strength. And above all, it revealed the poison of racism and classism, the way privilege blinds men like Ethan into believing others exist only to be humiliated. How many Marcus Greens walk among us today, silenced by circumstance, enduring cruelty for survival? How many Laylas sit quietly in classrooms, their brilliance unseen because of the color of their skin, the neighborhood they were born in, or the wealth they lack? And how many Ethan Caldwells still sit in penthouses, convinced their power is unshakable? This was not just the story of one girl, one father, and one billionaire. It is a mirror held up to our society, a reminder that dignity cannot be bought, that knowledge cannot be silenced, and that arrogance built on injustice will always, eventually, fall. As Layla once told her father at their modest dinner table, powerful men reveal their weakness when they underestimate others. The real strength is using knowledge not just for yourself, but to change the rules for everyone. So I leave you with this question. When faced with arrogance, cruelty, or prejudice in your own life, will you stay silent? Or will you, like Layla, find the courage to change the game? Because the world is always watching. And sometimes it only takes one voice, one unexpected act of brilliance, to bring down an empire. You've just heard how a young girl's brilliance brought a billionaire to his knees and how dignity and courage turned humiliation into hope. But what about you? If you had been in Layla's place, facing arrogance and cruelty, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one.